Hey, what's up, guys? It's Tips, and boy, do I have good news for you. I mean, dear Lord, I woke up this morning and I was like, yeah, got up a little bit late, but let me go to the gym, let me work out, get the blood flowing, get all pumped up for my stream today. But guys, I did not need to go to the gym. I didn't go to the gym until much later because I opened up the internet and I saw my Twitter was absolutely blown up with notifications on this new update. Yes, guys, there has been a new Classic WoW update, the second in like 10 days or something like that, which is absolutely insane, especially when you consider it took us 7 months to get the first update after BlizzCon 2017. Blizzard looks to be ramping up things heading into the summer, and that is fantastic news. And guys, I cannot think of a better update, a better way to start that ramping up process than this update here. In my opinion, this is the best update we have ever gotten about Classic WoW, not because of how much substance is in the post, but also because of the implication of this post. And that is what I wanted to talk to you guys about today. This video is going to be a much longer video. We are going to be analyzing this new Classic WoW update in detail because it means so much, not just for the gameplay of Classic WoW, but also for the community, also for Blizzard, and also for Classic WoW's reception from the general audience. And it's a big subject, and we're going to tackle this very slowly throughout this video. I'm going to break down every single point raised in the update. So if you guys are doing something around the house or you're working on something else, feel free to close the video or at least put it on in the background. Because the visuals aren't going to be too intense or anything like that. It's mostly just going to be me talking. But with that said, let's go ahead and get started. So what was the update that was released today? Well, today, Blizzard, in a blue post written by Kvax, I believe that's how you pronounce his name, who appears to be the new CM in charge of Classic, or at least is one of the major CMs that's been corresponding with the community on the forums in regards to Classic. He wrote out a post detailing or explaining that Blizzard has actually decided to change their 4-stage content plan that was announced at BlizzCon 2018 and alter it to be 6 stages, which is something the community was asking for pretty much daily since the 4-stage plan was released. Now, for those that have been out of the loop for a little bit, I'm going to backtrack a little bit just to explain what I'm talking about here. So at BlizzCon about 4 months ago, there was a Classic WoW panel, which was fantastic. It was conducted by Ian Hazzikostas, who you guys know from Retail WoW. It was conducted by Omar Gonzalez, who is one of the chief engineers on the Classic WoW team, I believe one of the QA engineers, and conducted also by Brian Birmingham, who I believe is the tech lead on Classic WoW. And during that panel, they explained their philosophical approach to Classic, how they intend on releasing content in the game, as well as some other miscellaneous items, including the release date of Classic WoW, or at least the release date timeframe. Now, when they were discussing how they're going to release content in Classic, they announced that at the time, their thinking was they are going to break down all of the 112 patches, 12 patches in Classic WoW. They were going to break them down and clump them up into 4 stages, where essentially multiple patches would be grouped up into each individual stage. Now, on the surface, that sounds like a pretty decent idea, and for the most part, it wasn't that bad, albeit there were some concerns, and I'll explain the concerns for you guys in just a moment. But overall, most people in the community felt like the patches, the stages were too limited, and that some of the stages or some of the raids within those stages, some of the features within those stages needed to be separated into at least 2 more stages. Personally, I advocated for a 6-stage plan, which is awesome because that's what we got. And it's pretty much right in line with what I and many others suggested a couple of months back. So it's awesome to see that Blizzard is listening. And we actually have open with us right here behind you guys. I actually have the exact breakdown difference between the BlizzCon proposed plan and the plan that we received today. And this is courtesy of classic.wowhead.com. Thank you so much, Perk, for putting this together for us. But as you can see, on the left-hand side here, we see BlizzCon 2018 phases. These were the phases that were announced for BlizzCon, and you can see all the content on the left-hand side. This was the content, the raids, the dungeons, etc., that were promised within each phase. And now on the right-hand side here, you can see the new proposed phases. So as you can see, a lot of the content from phase 1 was pushed to phase 2, which was pushed to phase 3, etc. And we have ultimately 2 more additional phases as well. And I'm going to break this down right now for you guys in detail, why this was so important and why Blizzard made the right move here. So let's start off with phase 1. Originally, at BlizzCon 2018, Blizzard announced that Molten Core, Onyxia, Maraudon, Dire Maul, Azure Ghost, the world boss, and Kazakh, the world boss, would all be released on Classic launch in Phase 1. Now, to put that into context, when were these content patches or when were these features released back in Original Vanilla? Well, Molten Core and Onyxia were available at Original Vanilla's launch, but Maraudon was patched up in patch 1.2, which happened around 3 weeks after launch. And then Dire Maul came in, I believe, patch 1.3, about 3 or so months. It was either 1.3 or 1.4, about 3 or 4 months after Vanilla WoW had released, alongside the world bosses. In the new content plan, Blizzard has kept Molten Core, Onyxia, and Maraudon in Phase 1 and has pushed Dire Maul, Azure Ghost, and Kazakh to their own phase in Phase 2, more closely resembling the way it was back in Vanilla, and this is a great thing. Now, why is it a great thing? Well, if you guys didn't know, Dire Maul, which was, the 3 or so dungeons, I guess depending on how you classify them, it was essentially the dungeon that brought with it a lot of updated gear. It brought with it a variety of different world buffs, and it brought with it basically more means to trivialize the content. It was essentially the first ever catch-up dungeon. And just so you guys understand how powerful the items and the buffs are in Dire Maul, I've got them in front of us here. I'm going to break it down for you. Dire Maul came with a set of world buffs. And I'm going to tell you what those world buffs did, and hopefully you can get an idea of just how powerful these world buffs actually were. The first world buff that you could get from running Dire Maul Nor Tribute is Fangus's Ferocity, which gave you 200 attack power for 2 hours. 200 attack power is a lot in Vanilla WoW. It's freaking huge. Moldar's Moxie, which is the second buff you can get from Dire Maul Nor Tribute, gave you 15% stamina for 2 hours. And the third buff, Slipkick's Savvy, gave you 3% spell crit for 2 hours. Attack power, stamina, and spell crit for 2 hours. Huge buffs and a huge nerf to Molten Core and Onyxia, which were the 2 primary raids available at the time. If you had these buffs at Classic WoW launch, Molten Core and Onyxia would be an absolute joke beyond what they kind of already are. They're, the first raids in Classic, they're going to be the easier raids, but to further trivialize these raids, on top of the 16 debuffs that we've already been guaranteed at BlizzCon, this is pretty bad, and unfortunately, it would trivialize the content. But beyond just trivializing the content and making it easier, Dire Maul would also disrupt the progression curve of players. And I made a big video talking about progressive itemization and progression curves. You guys can check that out at the end of this video if you'd like. But what am I talking about here? Well, in Dire Maul, not only did you get world buffs, but just like any other dungeon, Blizzard introduced a variety of different gear. And some of that gear, like the Ogre Forged Hauberk, which drops off of Dire Maul Nor Tribute, along with the Tarnished Elven Ring, the Satyr's Bow, these are pretty much best in slot for a lot of different classes, and replaced a lot of the gear that you would get not only at the end game and end game dungeons, but these are better than some pieces in Molten Core. And other pieces like Sublime Wrist Guards, depending on what state they're released in, very powerful. Redoubt Cloak was also brought in Dire Maul. It's the only cloak in the game with defense on it. I think pre-BWL, I'm pretty sure. Padre's Trousers, pre-raid best in slot. And Hide of the Wild pattern, which is an amazing cloak, an epic cloak. All of these items were also introduced in the Dire Maul patch. And again, they're very powerful, which trivializes raids. But more importantly, because they're so strong, they essentially trivialize a lot of the gear in Molten Core and give players less incentive to raid Molten Core, which means that players would rather run Dire Maul in many cases, not necessarily rather run, but a lot of the gear in Dire Maul is on par with or better than the gear in Molten Core, which again disrupts the progression curve in Vanilla. essentially you skip the importance of Molten Core, and that's a travesty because players should be running Molten Core, and they will still be running Molten Core for bindings and some other pieces here and there, but it's very important for each raid to have its own weight. And when you add Dire Maul into the mix at launch, it takes away the weight of Molten Core, and again, disrupts that feeling of smooth progression for each individual player. And that's just Dire Maul coming in at the start. We haven't even touched the world bosses, who also have a lot of gear that they bring to the table. Some of the pieces are best in slot till AQ and Nax. Puissant Cape is a piece that comes to mind. Very, very powerful cape for melee DPS. Really, really strong cape. And when you add world bosses in at the start, once again, it takes away from that smooth progression curve. But also in the case of world bosses, the reason why it was bad to have them at the start is because world bosses are a big event in Classic WoW and in Vanilla. Their arrival was a big event, and world boss battles are some of the most unique and epic experiences you will come across in Classic WoW. To have them at the start would mean that the vast majority of players would never have access to a single world boss because the top guilds on their server would be rushing to level 60 and taking the world boss spawns right away and dominating those spawns, preventing other guilds from being able to contest them at all. When you separate world bosses with Dire Maul in their own distinct phase, it allows everyone on the server to get hyped up and participate in the world boss arrivals and can generate some of the most fantastic and gargantuan epic scale warfare that's ever been seen in MMOs, period. And I'll put a video for you in the background so you guys can see what I'm talking about. I mean, this is just epic stuff right here. And again, by putting them in their own phase, Blizzard has created a hype event for each individual server to rally around and has allowed some of the newer players, some of the newer guilds to participate on the launch day of the bosses in these epic and grand battles. And it's just great all around. Absolutely great decision. Putting Dire Maul and world bosses in phase 2 was a stupendous move. It does so much good for the game, not just for hardcore players, but for casual players alike. And overall, I think it was a big, big step in the right direction. Very, very happy about it. And the best part is, it's just the first in a couple of other changes that Blizzard has made. So let's keep going here. Moving on to phase 2 of the BlizzCon 2018 proposed plans. Now, at BlizzCon 2018, Blizzard proposed Blackwing Lair to release alongside the PvP Battleground and Honor system, as well as Zul'Gurub. Now, back in Vanilla, Blackwing Lair released, I believe, in patch 1.5 or 1.6. I think it was 1.6. And Zul'Gurub released in patch 1.7, which was a couple of months later. So ZG and BWL did not release at the same time back in Vanilla, and to release them at the same time would be really, really bad for a number of different reasons. Number one, we talked about the progression curve and how adding catch-up gear that was intended to be a catch-up mechanic later on, bringing it earlier would disrupt that progression curve for players. But number two, ZG comes with a lot of reputation rewards, comes with powerful enchants, comes with a lot of things that just weren't meant to be in the game during BWL progression. And on top of that, it hurts the casual player who finds themselves having to raid all of this content all the time. Each phase is just going to be so difficult for a casual player to digest. It hurts them. It puts them further and further behind and allows the better guilds to excel further and further ahead. This was not good for the game at all to have both ZG and Blackwing Lair in the same patch. And thankfully, guys, in the new proposed plan that was unveiled today, Blizzard has separated BWL and ZG. BWL is now in phase 3. Alongside the Darkmoon Faire and Darkmoon Faire decks, which we'll talk about a little bit later. And Zul'Gurub is now in phase 4, along with the Nightmare Dragons, the Green Dragons, which I'll talk about in just a little bit. Now, the thing that I want to point out in this phase in particular is that the PvP honor system has been removed from the proposed phases. And that's actually something Blizzard mentions later on in the blue post. They say specifically that they've examined the PvP system, and they've noticed that certain gear gets upgraded during Vanilla WoW's PvP progression, and as a result, they want to reanalyze when they want to fit in the PvP system in the grand scheme of their overall phases, and I think that's fantastic. I think that's great. For the PvP system to release with BWL and ZG would have been absolutely insane. It would have made ranking so much... It would have been too much. It would have been just way too much for a lot of players. And on top of that, because we didn't understand how the PvP gear was going to work, it could mean that really strong PvP gear was coming into the game really early, which again, hopefully will not happen now, but we'll have to see what Blizzard decides to do with the PvP system later on. Moving on now to Phase 3 of BlizzCon 2018, Blizzard had proposed that the Green Dragons, the AQ War Effort, as well as Tier Point 5 would all come in Phase 3. Once again, that's now changed. Zul'Grub and Green Dragons will ship together in Phase 4. Now, the reason why this one is very important is because Green Dragons, the Emerald Dragons, the 4 Emerald Dragons, they drop a lot of really good nature resist gear, which is a big deal for AQ. So to release the Green Dragons at the same time as AQ would kind of be ridiculous, seeing as they came a couple months before AQ in original vanilla for the sake of gearing players up with nature resist gear so they can go into AQ. So it was kind of putting the cart before the horse at BlizzCon 2018. Those things should have been separated. The Green Dragons should have come before AQ. Blizzard has made that alteration, which is great. This was another one of the recommendations that myself and a lot of other people made prior to this new proposed update. So fantastic, fantastic decision by Blizzard. And again, smooths the progression curve and allows content to be released when it was intended to be released back in the day. And finally, Phase 4 of the BlizzCon 2018 phases was Naxxramas and the Scourge Invasion, as well as the loot revamp, which was not announced. I mean, it wasn't really announced. The loot revamp is the patch 110 itemization revamp, which again, I'll talk about in just a second here. But that was Phase 4 at BlizzCon. Blizzard has added a new Phase 5 and a new Phase 6. In Phase 5, you will have the AQ War Effort, which is the enormous, one of the most enormous and spectacular server-wide events we've ever seen in the genre, as well as the AQ Raids, AQ 20, AQ 40, Tier Point 5, which is fantastic. I think it came in the AQ patch. It might have come in patch 110. It might have been patch 110. I can't remember. But more or less, it's pretty much the same timeline here, as well as the loot revamp. Now, what is the loot revamp? Well, in patch 110, back in original vanilla, a wide array of new powerful blue items were added into the game, not in new dungeons, but in pre-existing dungeons. And not only that, a lot of new epic recipes were introduced into the game, such as Titanic Leggings, which Blizzard mentioned specifically in this post. And these pieces were so powerful that they invalidated a lot of other gear. I mean, gear that you could find in Molten Core and BWL sometimes. These just typical dungeon blues. So they definitely messed up with the progression curve. They were definitely inserted into the game as a catch-up mechanic for players to get to some of the later raids more quickly, and they definitely should not have been in Classic WoW at the start. So to see Blizzard address them in their own phase and release these blues in the timetable that they basically were released back in vanilla is incredibly comforting. It just puts you at ease so much because, once again, nobody knew when these blues were going to be released. And items like Spellweaver's Turvan, incredibly powerful. And I think that one drops off of Drakaseth, although it might be Stratholme, I can't remember. But a very, very strong headpiece for casters. That's not going to be in the game at launch, thank God. I already mentioned Titanic Leggings, another really big deal, not going to be in the game at launch. Diana's Pearl Necklace, which is... It doesn't invalidate Choker of the Firelord, but it's very close to Choker of the Firelord in terms of power. That's the neck piece that drops off of Ragnaros. That's coming in, again, in Phase 5, not at the start of Vanilla, which, once again, helps not invalidate early content and does not disrupt the progression curve of players. It allows players to linearly grow with the game's unfolding, not jump up in power right away and have to wait for a year before any meaningful upgrades come out. I cannot overstate just how important that is. And then finally, Stage 6 will be Naxxramas and Scourge Invasion, which, as far as I'm concerned, is perfectly fine for me. Oh my god. Oh my god. Great. Absolutely fantastic. Once again, I mean, this was what the community asked for. Not just the content creators. Screw the content creators. This is what everybody on Reddit, on the forums, all over the place, we're submitting their feedback on, and we're really recommending for Blizzard to do. And I cannot overstate how much the community has done in this process. Guys, you freaking killed it, man. If you ever posted something on a Reddit, or even if you just upvoted something on the Classic WoW Reddit, or if you've ever posted something on the forums or anywhere, if you've ever raised your voice on this issue, give yourself a freaking pat on the back, because it was you guys that made this possible, and very proud of the community for doing this. And of course, a big thanks to Blizzard for freaking listening, man. I don't know how you guys have felt over the past couple of weeks since the layoffs, but I was kind of getting a little concerned because we had lost our primary contact with Blizzard at the time, which was Yithisons. But in the past 10 days or so, I mean, Blizzard has put all those concerns to rest. They're listening. They're communicating now more than ever, it seems, and they're releasing these updates much faster than we've ever seen before. So props to Blizzard for doing that. Very proud of them. And yeah, it's really great. Moving on in this post, it wasn't just the stage content release that was introduced. Once again, they talked about a couple of other things, including the PvP honor system. So, as I said before when we were going over the phases, the honor system was removed from the original BlizzCon 2018 plan. It was there originally at BlizzCon, but in this new plan, it's been removed. And the reason for that, and I'm just going to read it verbatim off the blue post, is because Blizzard is still evaluating their options regarding PvP rewards, as they also changed over time, both in power and in terms of which PvP reward items were available. This is a huge deal. A huge deal. And any ranker will tell you this is a big deal. The reason why this is such a big deal is that when the honor system was introduced back in vanilla, basically the PvP rewards that were introduced were a lot weaker than they eventually became. I believe the last time the PvP rewards got upgraded was in patch 112, where they became what a lot of you guys know them as now, much more powerful down the line than they were in the beginning, especially the blue PvP set, which I think was updated in 111 or 110, I can't remember, but the blue PvP gear, like, it got really strong towards the end of vanilla, to the point where it was better to rank in many cases and not have to rely on raid loot drops, before you could PvE. It was better to PvP, get the blue PvP gear, and then raid, instead of having to solely rely on loot drops in raids. So to see Blizzard understand that this could potentially be a problem in Classic is very reflective, I think, of the level at which they're examining the game, and that is a very deep level. They're not looking at this from a company standpoint. They're looking at this like developers who truly care about Classic's success, and they're going down into the nitty-gritty. And that's what I love so much about this blue post, guys. Out of all the blue posts so far, and this is why I said I think it's the most important update, this is the first post I feel that really goes deep, or at least a lot deeper than we've gone before, into the nitty-gritty, and shows us that Blizzard is looking at this game like any of us would look at it. And I think that's absolutely awesome. Big props to the Blizzard developers, the Classic WoW developers for going hard on this, to Brian Birmingham, to Omar Gonzalez, and everybody else that's involved in the project. Holy God, they are not disappointing, I will tell you that much. So when it comes to the phase content release plan, that's pretty much all I wanted to talk about and how I wanted to break this down for you guys. Once again, I think it's infinitely better than it was before. The new proposed phases are much better than they were before, not just for hardcore players, but for casual players and hardcore players alike, for PvPers and PvEers alike. This is a unanimously agreed upon 100% positive change, and I'm sure a lot of you guys are excited about it. You don't need to hear me say it. You guys have been dancing all morning once you've heard the news, but it's really awesome that they did this. Now, moving on beyond gameplay, this blue post that we got today did not just talk about phase content release and power progression and itemization. I think this blue post says a lot more than what's stated within it. Once again, guys, Classic WoW was announced at BlizzCon 2017, and we hadn't received our first update until I think June 16th or something, 2018. Essentially, we went 7+ months without any kind of news update. And after the update in June, we didn't get one until October, 4 months later. And since October, I guess since BlizzCon technically, it's been another 4+ months since we've gotten an update. That is until the update that was released, I think, a week or so ago, talking about the changes between private server experience and original classic WoW. That was the first update we had received in a little over 4 months. Just 8 days later, we're getting our second update. Just 8 days later. So in the past 8 days, we've gotten more blue posts about Classic WoW's development than we had in the year or so prior, which is absolutely insane. And I think it's definitely a sign of things to come. I think the game's development is ramping up. I think the whole prepare for a classic summer thing has a lot more weight now. And I think, while my prediction originally was August 27th, I think it's possible that classic could come in July. I mean, maybe towards the end of July, but I think it's definitely on the table now based on these updates we've been getting and the frequency of these updates and the depth of these updates. They're not just fluff PR pieces. These are in-depth, coming down to our level, talking to us about the game on a patch-by-patch basis. Absolutely love the quality of this update in particular, and I'm looking forward to a lot more, and that's the best part about this update, guys. While we can't elaborate on every detail of every step we're going to take yet, we're here reading all of your questions, and we're going to keep the answers coming. Absolutely love it. Absolutely love it. Does this mean we're going to get an update every single week? Probably not, but once a month leading into the launch, I wouldn't doubt it at this point. I think they're doing a fantastic job, and it definitely makes me feel better. Once again, coming off those layoffs a couple of weeks ago, I was getting really worried about the project, not from a development standpoint, but from a communication standpoint. And I had felt that maybe we might not have the communication channels that we used to, and maybe Classic WoW will suffer as a result because there is no line of communication between the community and the developers. But this update and the update from last week has really put that concern to rest. Blizzard has proven a lot of us wrong over the past 8 days or so. And I think the project is in very, very good hands. Very happy to see this. And once again, shout out to the community for pushing for stuff like this. But guys, the battle is still not over. Right-click reporting, loot sharing, and sharding. We still have those three to tackle, and I hope that the next updates that we get from Blizzard talk about these three things, and hopefully, Blizzard decides to take some of the community feedback on those three things and make some changes as well. That would be incredible. But guys, loot sharing, right-click reporting, you guys know how I feel about that one in particular, and sharding. Leave your concerns, leave your feedback on the forums. If this update says anything, it says and shows that Blizzard is listening. So let's hope they continue listening from here on out. I think they're doing a great job once again. And yeah, I'm looking forward to more of these blue updates. So if you guys would like to discuss this update with me at any point in time, I'm going to be streaming tomorrow at 10 a.m. Pacific time. And we also have a Classic Cast tomorrow at 4:30 p.m. Pacific time, I believe, as well. And I'm going to be streaming after the Classic Cast too. So it's going to be a very busy day for me tomorrow. But if you want to talk to me face-to-face on Twitch tomorrow, it is the best day to do so. And I'll be on Twitch for a big portion of the day. But aside from that, you guys can tweet at me on Twitter, twitter.com/tipsoutbaby. Or you can join our community Discord, which I've linked in the description below. That's a really good way to contact me, honestly, especially for like long-winded discussions like this. But aside from that, guys, have a wonderful day, fellas. Hope you guys enjoyed the update. I'll see you guys on Twitch tomorrow. And as always, tips out, baby. Woo!